Go. Good day. Welcome back to Worldviews. We've got the pleasure to discuss the world situation with Alex Krainer again, a financial analyst and geopolitician. Alex, great to have you back on Worldviews.
Good to join you again, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Let's get into this peace deal situation. If I may outline it, and then if you would mind deconstructing what's going on. For the average Joe Sixpack, if I may say, it looks like there is an imminent possibility of a ceasefire, and that both sides will be obligated to stop the war temporarily for 30 days, and we may see an eventual permanent peace deal. On the other hand, there are some experts, and I'm sure you have your take, who are saying this is a bit of a kabuki theater, and this forces Russia to basically tie its hands while Ukraine may decide to rearm, escalate the conflict. We saw the drone attack against the Moscow suburbs. Who is really the beneficiary if there is an actual ceasefire on the ground, Alex Krainer?
Well, we can discuss about the beneficiary, but the likelihood of a ceasefire in the short term is about as much as the likelihood of getting a snowball in hand. If you say that both sides will be obliged to do this and that, who's going to oblige Russia to do anything? They will do exactly what's in their best interest, and that is to continue the war, because they have been very, very clear about what they are demanding, what their demands are. And so, to begin with, Ukraine would have to withdraw all their troops from the four republics. So, there's still parts of Zaporozhye and Lugansk that are under Ukraine's control. So the Russians are demanding that they withdraw from there. They're demanding that Ukraine commits to being a neutral country and gives up its intention to become member of NATO. So no more NATO membership, and to give up the four republics that Russia has annexed legally. And Vladimir Zelensky has already said that he's not accepting those conditions. So Russians have no reason to give him 30 days to regroup and rearm, and then to then renew the war when they are refreshed and better prepared to fight it. So unless there's some kind of a very surprising, spectacular development in the near future, there's not going to be any ceasefire.
Okay, we saw the delegation that was sent to Riyadh. Rubio, Waltz from the American side. I'm not sure if any top Russian negotiators were there. These are preliminary talks, I guess, which would lead to the Trump Putin summit of sorts. What if the preliminary talks fall through and Russia does not go along with this peace deal? As you say, it doesn't look very promising, because the Ukrainian side doesn't want to make any concessions. It seems like they're escalating. They're provoking Russia to respond with the drone attack. What if this deal, let's say, falls through? Will the war intensify? Will the Russian advance continue westwards? Or could we see the Europeans intervene as so-called peacekeepers into the conflict?
Well, the Europeans will not intervene unless the Trump administration gives them security guarantees, which in practice means that the American side would take on the obligation to intervene to protect and defend troops on the ground. The United States would also have to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. the military realities are such that these are all fantasies. European troops are not going to go there without American protection, and American protection is going to be, let's say, limited. You know, they've had Biden in the White House for 4 years. This war has been going on for 3 years. It started with a completely intact Ukrainian military, with troops and arsenals bursting to the brim, full commitment, support, and military financial intelligence from collective NATO, from the United States, and this has all been whittled down to close to nothing. So to pretend that now somehow things could turn around if only Donald Trump commits to providing security guarantees for European troops is a joke, frankly. The Great Britain today has a total of 70,000 troops, and the military math is such that that means that they could put on the ground in Ukraine a maximum of 3,000 to 4,000 troops. That does nothing. Maybe the French could put a little bit more, the Germans could put some, the Poles could put more, Romanians, Bulgarians. But if you take all of the European NATO member nations and you shook them down, you couldn't come up with 50,000 troops. That's still nothing. And you're still not controlling the airspace over Ukraine. So there's no winning this militarily. I think that the only way that they could possibly be hoping to turn this around is to finally provoke Russia into a military response against a NATO target, against a NATO member nation target, to strike, facilities on European soil, or shoot down a NATO airplane, or something of the sort. US nuclear war doctrine also lists a cyber attack as a potential threat that could trigger nuclear response. So I think that the idea is to continue provoking, continue the war going, hope to get a pretext to invoke Article 5, and then unite NATO to stage a collective response, and then to escalate the whole thing to World War III. And then this could still not win them the war, but for as long as the war is going, they're still bleeding Russia. They're still hoping to weaken it enough to be able to destabilize the government, to orchestrate some kind of a regime change, or to wait out Putin, because he's not immortal. He's not going to be there forever. So, for as long as the war is going on, they don't care how many people will die, how badly Ukraine is going to get destroyed. They are completely obsessed with regime changing Russia, and then ultimately partitioning it, balkanizing it. And the reason, and now we can talk about the beneficiaries, the reason to do that would be to be able to take control of Russia's natural resources. Because Russia has an estimated $75 to $90 trillion in natural resource wealth. And for Western financial systems that are absolutely starved for fresh collateral, this is the price worth risking nuclear war. And so if they were somehow able, this is their Christmas fantasy, if they were somehow able to bring back a government to Kremlin that would be like Boris Yeltsin's government, so that they get the rule of the land, then they could turn all of those resources into collateral that's controlled by Western financial institution. It could fuel an absolutely massive new credit cycle, and it could refloat the whole Western financial system, which is now at the verge of disintegrating. And when I say disintegrating, we're not going to have a Lehman Brothers moment anymore, but because under the cover of the COVID-19 pandemic, the banking institutions have staged a coup. They've largely taken political power in Western jurisdictions. They can print money at their discretion. They don't need approval of parliaments, congresses, anything like that. And so, but they will have to print money without collateral, with nothing backing it, which will push them from stagflation, where we are now, into hyperinflation. And that then leads to the disintegration of the whole system. So that's the downside, and that's a near certainty for Britain and the EU, unless the United States steps back in, unless they can escalate this to World War III, and then at some point get control of Russia. But at the moment, this is all looking very highly unlikely. So all the noise, all the kabuki theater that they're doing is basically hollow trash talk, and venting their wishful thinking.
So that would be, excuse me, the possibility that Russia would be dismantled and its resources pillaged is something that, of course, the banks and the Western financial system is eager to envisage. But could we, Alex Krainer, look at the state of the European banking system right now, and all this political talk of getting a European defense fund, of spending more and more on weaponry? Is this a stimulus for the European economy to compensate for the lack of growth, the deindustrialization in Germany? I mean, war is profitable, isn't it? Or even preparing for a war that may escalate to a third world conflict, a third world war, excuse me. Isn't it profitable just to get all of this money flowing in the system for weaponry? Is this going to boost the European economy and bring it out of its doldrums? The preparation for war, I mean?
Well, war is profitable to a narrow segment of our societies, which is banks and the military-industrial complex. It could stimulate the economies. It could do that it could create a new business cycle that would increase output. It would increase the GDP. It would create some employment, which would create more employment. If you shower hundreds of billions of dollars on the military-industrial complex, some people are going to becoming prosperous, and then other people are going to be able to open service businesses, restaurants, car dealerships, and stuff like that. So you do fuel a new business cycle. The problem is that Western economies don't have collateral and they don't have money, so they have to create more debt, but on what collateral? So we hear from the French government, from let's say representatives of the French government in the EU, that their idea is to use Russian frozen assets as collateral. And then just yesterday, I saw that Ursula von der Leyen was talking about simply appropriating the savings of the European people as collateral. So to say, like, okay, you're going to be investing these savings in these Eurobonds that we're going to be issuing, and then we're going to be giving that money to the defense industries to prepare for war against Russia, for which we will volunteer your sons as cannon fodder. So in other words, we're looking at a new cycle of militarization and Nazification on the old continent. We already saw that before in 1930s. It didn't end well. We saw it in Ukraine between 2014 and 2022. it's not going well. I don't see why they think that it should go well this time. I mean, Western powers have been trying to conquer and dismember Russia for several centuries now, depending on how you want to look at it. But some of these adventures go into the 1500s. You know, the Swedes tried, the Polish tried, the French tried, the Germans tried. In many cases, it's not just, you know, France. Napoleon goes and tries to invade Russia and conquer it. It was pretty much the collective Europe under Napoleon. And then in 1941, it wasn't just Germany, Nazi Germany and Hitler that said, okay, we're going to invade Russia and conquer it. It was, again, practically the whole collective Europe, you know, the Finns, the Dutch, the Danes, the Germans, Poles, Hungarians, Italians, Spaniards, French. That was, you know, Germans didn't have 3 million troops. This was a 3 million troop invasion. Failed. Napoleon failed, they failed, the Poles failed, the Swedes failed. Now attacking Russia through, well, threatening Russia through Ukraine as a proxy, that failed, in spite of the fact that they created the second most powerful nation on the European, the second most powerful military on the European continent, apart from Turkey. And it still failed. And they've been preparing for this war for 8 years. So it's, if you keep doing the same things over and over again, and you keep getting the same outcome, and you keep trying, I don't know how else to call it but insanity. And it is really clear that our leaders in Europe today are insane people. And they're, again, betting the ranch, squandering the wealth and prosperity of all the peoples of Europe to try to achieve that which they failed to achieve every single time they tried. And we have to ask ourselves, why are they doing it and for whose benefit? And it's very clear that they're doing it for the benefit of the banking oligarchies that are the actual power behind the throne.
So we see the key role that the financial system and the bankers are playing in continuing this war. And I wanted to introduce another element here. The French the demographer and historian Emmanuel Todd wrote a book in French entitled La Défaite de l'Occident, the defeat of the West, and he's saying basically that Ukraine is almost like the graveyard for the West. It's a big quagmire. It shows all the weaknesses of the West, while Russia has shown resilience. We're throwing everything at them. They haven't collapsed financially. Putin is still in power. So if you know, and to add what you were saying, which sort of concurs with Todd's theory, why are we continuing this insanity, prolonging this war, when we know, if you just look at it, if a Martian came from Mars and looked and said, well, look, we're losing this war. Russia seems to be at least holding its own. Why are we so obsessed with this Halford Mackinder heartland theory to dismantle Russia, when Russia seems to be still capable of challenging the West, and we're paying a very high economic price. We're paying a political price because of all the discontent in Europe. Why is this like a collective suicide, Alex Krainer, for Europe?
Well, in a way, yes, but it's not suicide in the sense that individual European people are deciding to commit suicide. Is that we are being volunteered to be sacrificed in the similar way that the Ukrainians were sacrificed and are being sacrificed. Ukrainians didn't want this war. Ukrainians didn't want to join NATO. You know, the polls that were ran in 2014, before 2014, after 2014, Ukrainians in a slim majority wanted to join Europe, but they never wanted to join the NATO. And even at the dawn of this special military operation in 2022, the polls of Ukrainian men suggested that only about 16% of them had any desire to defend their country against the Russian invasion with arms. They were asked, if Russia invaded tomorrow, would you be prepared to defend the nation with arms? And the vast majority of men said no. Ordinary Ukrainians in ordinary circumstances had no hostility towards Russia. They had no desire for this war. They were nevertheless sacrificed, and the way they've been sacrificed is something that we need to pay close attention to, because now the same social engineering process is going on in Europe, and it goes about like this. First, you destroy the economy. You create very high youth unemployment. That gives you dry tinder for fueling extremism, militarism, Nazism, because you have millions upon millions of young men with no jobs, no future, no careers, no way to start families, raise children, have homes, jobs, income, and so forth. And then you start spreading money around these little brown shirt movements, and you start recruiting men into these organizations. And we see that happening already now. So the deindustrialization is happening, the economies are in the state of collapse. The organized capital, so the captains of finance are already allocating hundreds of billions of dollars into defense industries. And you already have these organizations, they very often they're recruited from out of football club fans, right? The thuggish type that's already kind of inclined to violence and street fights. And then you start giving them money, you start giving them weapons, you start giving them status. So now they go from disoriented losers in society to, people with status, people who can hurt you. And they're not. These organizations are not being developed in order to go and fight Russians. They're being developed in order to terrorize the domestic populations. And, this was the brown shirt movement in Germany, which grew from about 200 men in 1930 to between 2 and 3 million men in 1933 when Hitler came to power. Same thing in Ukraine. You have these the right sector, the C-14, the Azov battalion, Aidar battalion, and so forth. And these are the men that we see today shooting in the backs of Ukrainian troops if they dare to surrender or withdraw from fighting positions, going around cities and towns of Ukraine and abducting men to force them to fight. And this is what is being done in Europe. So European people have no appetite, no desire, no inclination to go to war against Russia. But the governing structures that are ruling European countries and the EU and the UK, they absolutely have this intention, and they have means and methods at their disposal. And if we don't pay attention and push back, in another few years, it might be our sons who are being abducted on the street and forced to go to the Eastern Front as cannon fodder to fight Russia for them. And again, it's not because we want to democratize Russia and bring freedom and human rights. It's because we want their collateral. We want their natural resource wealth, and we want their population as cheap labor or slave labor to extract those resources, turn them into financial flows that will all accrue to Wall Street, London, and other Western banks. That's the whole game. That's why
that's the game plan.
That's exactly the game plan. Of course, they're not telling you that that's the game plan. They're still going on about democracy and human rights and freedom and our values and threats from Russia. The Russians are going to come and get us if we don't go to war against them. But these are all lies. This is all propaganda. We see that it's completely fake and false. If the people in power gave a hoot about democracy, they wouldn't be canceling it in Romania, rigging it in Germany and in France, sabotaging it elsewhere in other ways. They would accept the will of the people, but they don't.
And precisely, you mentioned Romania, which we'll get into in a moment. But as you said, there is no appetite for war except for the financial elite, which is so obsessed with the dismantling of Russia and getting their paws on its vast resources. But if we just look at two ex-communist countries, Alex Krainer, one in the north, Poland, which is really flexing its muscles, gearing up for some kind of confrontation. We just heard recently Prime Minister Donald Tusk actually ordering practically a mobilization, which would amount to about 500,000 men or able-bodied men to be in the army for training purposes. They've purchased so much weaponry, just now a huge contract with South Korea for tanks. What is this all about? Because on one hand, one is wondering, Poland is not exactly the biggest military power, but or it's pretending to be. Is Poland now the poster boy of NATO, and are they going to be the next sort of in line to become the battering ram against Russia? Is this what Poland is priming itself for, to intervene in the conflict? Why all of this massive buildup of mobilization and weaponry? Is this just an exercise of some kind, or is Poland gearing up for some kind of a confrontation with Russia? Alex Krainer.
Well, I think it's part of the same plan. As you know, they were determined to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. We're getting there. They're running out of Ukrainians, and then they need new cannon fodder. And well, Poland's right there. It's a strong country. It's a viable country, and so I think that Poland, Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria are probably prime candidates to weaponize against Russia next. The people who are running the show, they don't care about Poland. They don't care about Romania, Moldova. They don't care about any of these people. In fact, they probably hate them, if anything. What they care about is to keep Russia fighting, to keep bleeding Russia, weakening it, so that they might at some point be able to destabilize it enough to have a regime change and to take Russia over from the inside. Nobody's asking the Polish people about this. They have their Radek Sikorski, who has been one of the forces of the Polish political class. He's a British agent. He used to be a British citizen before he came to Poland. He was educated and brainwashed at Oxford, at Pembroke College. He was a member of the by invitation only Bullingdon Club, which is the most elite of the British clubs. He was recruited into the club by none other than Boris Johnson, the big fixer for the British establishment. Other members of the Bullingdon Club that are household names would be Nathan Rothschild, George Osborne, David Cameron. Many of these top establishment figures in the UK are Bullingdon Club members, and one of them was also Radek Sikorski. So when they sent him back to Poland, he changed his citizenship back to Polish, but his political career took off like a rocket, and he's been, a cheerleader of war against Russia, coup in Ukraine, throughout this process. And he's probably one of the people who are now in charge of weaponizing Poland as the next bludgeon to be used against Russia. He'll be fine. His family will be fine. The Polish people will not be fine if this comes to pass. But that's the plan. And then, if Poland gets laid to waste, then they're going to go with Germany. These banking elites are never, ever going to stop. They do not have plan B. This business model, this model of governance that they have, is all they have. And their system can only be stable if it grows. And the reason for that is because they are the people in charge of the money. All the money that goes into circulation is debt. It has to be repaid with interest, which means that the money flowing back to them is always more than the money that they issue into the economy as credit. And that means that the whole system functions like a massive Ponzi scheme. Except it can't go forever, because at some point you saturate any economy's capacity to carry debt. There's only so much collateral. Like, you couldn't go to the bank and ask them to loan you $1 billion. They wouldn't, because they would say, what's your income? How much is your house worth? What are your assets? Is this much? Well, in that case, we can offer you only so much money. So when you get everybody into debt up to their eyeballs, then your system stops growing. And if it stops growing, it starts to implode like a house of cards, like all Ponzi schemes do. So the only way you can bring new collateral into the system is by taking control of other people's collateral, which is why then you fund the military industrial complexes, which is why you create big militaries and military bases everywhere around the world, why you stage regime changes, and why you go conquer other people's lands, create colonies, and build up an empire. And this is who is ruling over our societies. And they don't have a different plan. They will not go back to being artisans, being normal people living ordinary life. Their nations are never going to, Britain is not going to go back to being a neutral island nation, minding its own business, unless it is forced to do so. So they will keep trying. Britain has a mutual military agreement with Poland, which is outside of the scope of NATO. Both countries are made members of NATO, but they also have a mutual military cooperation agreement. Britain has similar mutual military cooperation agreement with Sweden and with France and with Ukraine and with Turkey and so forth. And then they just signed one with the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, why do all these governments have to have military cooperation agreement with a third-rate military on an island that's not even close to their borders, who cannot mobilize any military power, whose ships cannot barely sail out of port? Why is this all going on? The reason is because it gives British secret diplomacy and intelligence networks access to the levers of power in those countries, so they can begin to destabilize them, so they could begin to activate these crisis flashpoints, and that they can use them to create wars that can destabilize whole regions, Middle East, Ukraine, the Balkans, everywhere. Like this has been set up already more than a century ago, and they're still at it.
And it seems that Britain is playing the role of a post-imperial hegemon, that it's still like 100 years ago with Mackinder's theory of heartland, and their policies of containment of the world island, and they're spreading all of their influence to these countries with these bilateral agreements. But then it begs the question, what does Bosnia-Herzegovina gain from making this a pact with Britain, this mutual strategic agreement? There's a military component. Is there a financial component? Why are these countries, tangoing still with Britain, a post-imperial power? It's mysterious to me.
Yeah, it needs to be explained. I can only imagine that the government officials are being bribed into signing these cooperation agreements. I think that London still has a disproportionate influence over the flow of capital around the world, that they can condition cooperation. They can condition countries' access to the loans, to IMF, World Bank loans, with cooperation on military matters with the UK. And then they probably also encourage these officials with offering their children scholarship at Oxford, and trips, bribes, nice things, and that's in fact what's going on. You have a lot of these influential people from Poland, France, United States, Bosnia, Serbia, Turkey, Arab nations, who all have their children studying at Oxford and other British universities. They live very privileged life there, but their parents are expected to carry water for British interests at home, and they do. And this is how they get to stir the pot, even though they are now, they're no longer world's #1 economy. They're not even in the top 10. Maybe they are, but they're not in the top 5, let's say. In purchasing power parity, they're not even in the top 10. Their military is nothing. Their reputation is in tatters. Nevertheless, they still go around the world, and they act as though they hold the cards and they are relevant to all these conflicts everywhere around the world. And I think
and they still need the Americans to, because I remember in one of your interviews used that Mad Max analogy where you have this, warrior, and there's a sort of a little dwarf, hanging on from the back, manipulating this warrior to go in and crash and bash different countries. Is this Britain's role still to use America to impose its interest and its will around the world? And are the Americans still, going along with this kind of arrangement?
Well, I think that it has been up until Donald Trump's election. I think that things are now a little bit different, and they are now desperate to get Donald Trump back on board, which is why they are offering him. Well, Zelensky is offering it, but Zelensky is being directed what to say, what to do, and how to act by the British. Zelensky is offering Donald Trump this supposed $500 billion rare earths deal to bait him into continuing to support Ukraine. But with the United States, the situation is a little bit different now. They also, they also try to pretend, this whole charm offensive with Starmer visiting Trump, and then hand delivering a letter from the king himself inviting Trump for an unprecedented second state visit and a dinner at the Windsor Castle with His Majesty the king and all this. I wonder if this is going to have its desired effect, because of all people, Donald Trump can spot a hustle from a mile away. And what the British are doing is a hustle, because they're offering him a $500 billion deal for rare earth minerals that probably don't exist. And this is all supposed to be implemented through some fund to be set up in the future, for which the United States will have to provide seed capital to begin with. And then the United States would have to provide a security guarantee to Ukraine, so that, because without American security guarantee, not a penny of Ukraine's wealth can flow westwards. And then the United States is going to get like a portion of proceeds from this fund. Well, this all sounds nice, except the rare earth minerals probably don't exist, not anything remotely close to $500 billion worth of. The British have already secured the lion's share of Ukraine's wealth after the war. And they've done so apparently through the 100-year partnership agreement that Keir Starmer signed with Zelensky 4 days before Donald Trump's inauguration. And I think that Donald Trump and his administration, they're fully aware of what's going on. And this is why in his interview after meeting with Zelensky, Secretary of State Marco Rubio actually used the word hustle. He said, I hope that they're not trying to hustle us. He was talking about Zelensky. But they know fully well who the puppet master is and where the puppet masters are. And we all also saw that when, after the meeting in the White House, Zelensky ran straight back to London for his hugs and secure space to recover and for comfort and support. People in the Trump administration are not stupid. They are aware of this. They're talking to the Russians. The Russians know all this. The risk, let's say that the benefit that the British via Zelensky are offering to Trump are these rare earths, questionable whether they exist. The downside is the financial and military support that they have to provide for Ukraine. Additionally, the downside is the risk of nuclear war against Russia. So the downside is huge. The upside is meager, if not nothing. So that's a very lousy hustle as far as hustles go. At the same time,
it's a bad deal for the Americans. It seems like a bad deal.
It's a very, very bad deal for the Americans. On the other hand, if Donald Trump deals with the Russians, the upside is much, much bigger because not only do Russians control most of the resource-rich areas of Ukraine, the security is for free at no risk of nuclear war, right? So Americans don't have to send any troops, any military equipment, and no risk of nuclear war. And then not only does Ukraine's resources at play, also Russia's. And Russia has an estimated $75 to $90 trillion worth of resource wealth, as I mentioned. And they have offered the Americans to develop these resources jointly. So huge upside, no downside. And these duplicitous snakes in London and Paris are offering very little upside and a lot of downside. Now, if you had Kamala Harris at the White House, then selling all this with a sophisticated British accent and bringing the letter from the king would probably be enough to seal the deal. With Trump, probably not. So it's going to get interesting, and I predict that it's not going to work. I think that Trump is going to be cooperating increasingly with Russia, cultivating that relationship, disentangling himself from the European quote-unquote allies and from the British. And the result is going to be that British and European economies are going to start to disintegrate. Their currencies are going to begin to collapse. Their bonds are going to become worthless. And I think that Europe is looking at a Weimar Republic type unraveling.
An unbelievable scenario to go back to the 1930s or 20s hyperinflation sort of a scenario in Germany. Alex Krainer, in the final segment, and it seems like this is an optimistic portrait you're painting of rapprochement, normalization with Russia and the United States, doing a tango together for mutual benefit. So when we started out talking about beneficiaries, those that are being sidelined, it seems, are the Europeans. And this is going to certainly enrage a lot of the French and the Germans and the British who won't be at the party, if I may use that metaphor. And we're already seeing stirrings of discontent in Romania. And then in this final segment, we've seen that Georgescu, the presidential candidate has been basically disqualified, silenced, muzzled by Brussels, if I may say, and he cannot run for president in a democracy, post-communist democracy. This seems absurd. What do you think is Romania a ticking time bomb that could uh, unleash a mass revolt throughout Europe against the European Union if their dictatorial methods are imposed in other countries outside of Romania? How do you read the situation right now in Romania, Alex Krainer?
I think it's very difficult to predict, because if the people in power refuse the will of the people, if they try to repress the people, then you run the risk of the kind of unraveling that we had in the storming of Bastille type of unraveling. And we've also seen that in 1989 with the communist regime of Nicolae Ceausescu. So he ended up shot, and this does happen periodically in history, that people simply the discontent boils over, and people storm the government institutions, the parliament, the police stations, the government buildings. I read somewhere, I don't know if this is confirmed, but people were protesting in front of the Ukraine's constitutional court building, and they were threatening to break in. There was a risk that they would break in. They wouldn't disperse. And so the judges who disqualified Carlin Georgescu had to be evacuated by helicopter. Now, this was on X. I don't know if this actually happened, but the demonstration and the threat of people breaking
This was at the Romanian Constitutional Court in Bucharest,
yes,
right?
Yes. The protest in front of the Constitutional Court was for real, and the danger that people were going to storm it was real. So so far so good, but there's no telling what might happen tomorrow or next week or a month from now if the European bureaucracies continue to insist that only the candidates that they approve may be elected, that people have to go along with Carlin, with the strategy, with the agenda. Carlin Georgescu has been explicit that he wants to be the president of peace. He doesn't want to continue the war. He doesn't want to support Project Ukraine. And so the Europeans can't have this. They are hysterically frightened that the war might end. They absolutely want the work to continue. And in doing so, in taking that position, they are completely at odds with the majority of the European population. So, we might end up having storming of Bastille. We're very likely to have the disintegration of the European Union. We're very likely to have the disintegration of NATO in the near future. And so I think that it'll be very important for individual European governments to prepare for that moment, because they will have to be able to create their own monetary units and put them in circulation to avoid disruptions. They will have to speak bilaterally to their neighbors. They will have to deal with the Russians, with the Americans on bilateral basis, and they will have to create alternative economic arrangements to be able to continue to invest and trade and maintain their economies, so that things don't go too far downhill.
Massive changes
Yeah.
to foresee in Europe. And finally, Alex, could you just give us your take, your prediction quickly on this peace deal? Do you see it going forward or falling through, and the war escalating between the West and Russia?
No, I doubt that this peace deal, as it is being promoted today, is not going to go through because it doesn't satisfy any of Russia's demands. And Russia embarked on this war for her security reasons. This peace doesn't address her security reasons. To the contrary, it opens Russia to further security threats. So it's not going anywhere. Is there going to be an escalation of war between the West and Russia? I think in the short term, not, because the European nations are not prepared. You know, it'll take a long time for the defense industries to catch up. It'll take a long time to push these conscriptions through, you know, parliaments to whip up the war hysteria, the fear-mongering hysteria. And it's not a given that this is all going to work. I did mention that there's a social engineering process in place that we saw in the 1930s in Germany, that we saw in Ukraine after 2014. But, the situation has changed. The situation is very different. You know, back then, Britain used to be a very powerful nation. It used to be financial center of the world, number one in terms of GDP and so forth. It's not like that anymore. And then more importantly, perhaps, is that back then we all depended on television, radio, and printed word for information. So it was much easier for them to control the narrative. Today, they're not controlling the narratives, and you can see by their reactions that they are quite hysterical about, misinformation and disinformation, and they're trying to find a way of muzzling the social media. So they're having a very hard time mounting this kind of march to war. And I think that if we continue to push back and to voice our opposition loudly and clearly, I think that they will ultimately fail. And another reason why they might fail is that they are now opposed by three very powerful nations in Russia, China, and the United States. And so it's hard for me to imagine that they're going to be successful. And even if they mount something, even if they manage to mount something, it's going to be much weaker than in 1941. So I think it's doomed. I think we're looking at the agony of a dying empire. And so they're going to do everything they can to survive. They're going to do everything they can to extend the war and escalate it. But I think that ultimately they are not going to be successful.
On that note, let's see how this, you mentioned China, Russia, and of course the United States, this massive realignment going on in the world, which I'm looking forward to discussing with you in our next interview. I really appreciate, Alex Krainer, your insights and the global overview you provided for me and our audience. Thank you so much for joining me, Alex Krainer, and all the best, and until next time then.
Thank you, Michael, and good to join you always. Until the next time.
Au revoir, merci. Thank you.
Thank you.